No, I mean, architecture is political. We gotta add that stuff.
Indeed.
We're tearing down communities to build multifamily, and you have to understand we are creating displacement. You're displacing Black and brown folks, and they don't come back.
Half of this podcast would be dedicated to the history of Powerhouse, my journey and my discoveries, and hey, I'm going to solve this housing problem.
Hey guys, what's up? My name is Melissa Daniels. This is the Architecturalist Political Podcast where Black and brown folks talk about architecture. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and be part of my storytelling. I've always wanted to have a conversation about AIA politics. I've been with AIA since 2007 was when I wrote my first check to AIA membership. So we're in 2022. That's a long time. That's a long time to be part of an organization. It's not as long as me being with my cell phone carrier. That's even longer. But it's still a significant amount of time to pay in every year. Most of the time, I've paid out of my own pocket. Other times, it's been a challenge to have any of my previous firms to pay for my membership. The point of having this conversation, AIA, the politics of AIA, is not a lot of members know how AIA works. They only know the negative. They only know when they get mad. Dues are not cheap, especially when you're licensed. I am not licensed, so I paid the associate's fee, which is significantly less than when you're licensed. Licensed hundreds, even four figures in some cases, to be a member of this organization yearly. Most of the time, the firm does pay for it, but if you're a sole practitioner, I guess you would write that off of your taxes. I don't even know how that works. As an active member, I've been on a couple of committees, both local and national, and I still don't know how it's run. So this conversation is with Evelyn and Je'Nen, host of Practice Disrupted. And I gathered these two ladies to talk about the basics of AIA governance. How did they get involved with AIA? The difference between AIA and AIAS. AIA is an acronym for American Institute of Architects. So I just said AIAS, American Institute of Architecture Students. Apparently there are two separate organizations. I didn't even know that. So that conversation got a little confusing. We started talking about elections. How does that work? I didn't know how it worked until I raised my hand and say, hey, I would like to vote. And this conversation isn't just for members. It's also for non-members. And I feel like it's even more important for non-members because AIA is the largest organization for architects. Whether you want to or not, people listen to them when they say stuff other than you. So whatever it is that they put out, whatever it is that the general public perceives them as, is how they perceive architects. Whether you have AIA behind your name, Associate AIA, FAIA, Honorary AIA, or you just want to be a registered architect, people don't know the difference. The average person does not know the difference. And that's important to understand, too. As much as you dislike or hate the AIA, they're out there. And they are representing architects, whether you like it or not. Unless you come up with your own organization, or unless you become a public figure and tell the world the difference between your RA and the AIA. That's in my opinion. That's how I see it. Thank you to Evelyn and Je'Nen for coming on, and I can't wait to have future discussions with them in regards to this topic or just anything else, any other topic that they may have. So here you go. I have here with me Practice Disrupted. I'm going to have the two ladies introduce themselves just so that you guys know voices with, you should already know their voices anyway, because you listen to their podcast, obviously. So I'm going to start with Evelyn.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Lee. I am one of the co-hosts on Practice Disrupted. I'm also the founder of Practice of Architecture. And those are the two things that I do on this side. I work full-time at Slack Technologies as their head of workplace innovation.
Hey, Melissa. Thanks for inviting us. My name's Je'Nen, and I am the co-host of Practice Disrupted. And I also run my own small consulting business, Apostrophe Consulting. And that's what I do full-time in addition to running the podcast and sometimes volunteering with the AIA.
Oh, yes. And we sometimes volunteer with the AIA. We say that
periodically.
Periodically.
On occasions when they're bored and have nothing else to do. So our topic, I got these ladies together because marrying architecture is political. And AIA, we're going to talk a little bit about the politics of AIA. And I thought that, what better ladies to get on this podcast to talk about politics and the AIA at the same time is Je'Nen and Evelyn. So I want to get started with, how were you introduced to AIA? Did it start with college? Did it start with your first job? Let's start with the basics.
I got involved early in school. So I guess, maybe my connections were right when I was still an undergrad. And I was really involved with the AIS chapter at our school. And the local Charlotte community had a very strong AIA component. And so we were doing different programming together. And the one that I remember specifically was the mentorship committee, kind of partnering with our local professionals and teaming up to pair students with professionals and try to think about career advancement. So that was like really early on. And basically my engagement ramped up significantly once I took the leap into a national student leadership position with AIAS. Oh man, it's so hard to say. I used to say it really fast and now I can't say it at all. Anyway, it ramped up when I got involved with AIAS, which was a national leadership position. And so basically once I got elected national president, I had the opportunity to serve on the AIA National Board. And so that was like really my first experience with AIA National.
And just for clarification, AIAS, which is the American Institute of Architecture Students, is a separate organization entirely from AIA.
That's right.
So you really jumped in. You didn't even mess with the local chapter. You just went with straight national, right?
Yeah, basically, but only because I got involved in a national leadership position with my school first while I was a student, which maybe is hard to explain, but basically both organizations have political hierarchy, and the way that you get on the national board when you're in AIS is out of school. And so that kind of like was my process to propelling me to the national scene.
Where was your school?
UNC Charlotte in North Carolina.
Evelyn?
Wait, I think some listeners might be confused by Je'Nen. So I just want a little more clarification. She was the national president of AIAS, and by default, that position is on the AIA National Board for 1 year.
That's right.
Is that helpful?
Is that for every university?
Just
No.
for the AIAS national president.
So there's only one national president that you had to run, right? There were other people
That's
that
right.
were.
Yes. So similar to AIA and how they do their elections, they're chapter presidents, and they make the decision if they want to run to the national board. And so there's different elections where you can run for president, vice president, or one of the regional quad director positions. And it might be a little different now, but I think generally the same. And so at that moment in time, I was running for the national president position and I got it. And then that put me into a role where I got to serve on the AIA National Board as the student director.
So you were the representative for the students
That's right.
with all the other AIA folks.
That's right.
And was there board at the time, or was it wasn't the council, right?
That's right. There was, at that time, it was still a 50+ person board. And I was in my early 20s, a young woman trying to figure out her career. And I was definitely the youngest person in the room.
And there's only one of you.
There's
right?
only one
One
per
student
year.
per year that represents all of the other students
That's right. On the board.
on the board. With fit
But
at
all
the time.
of the other students, but technically only 4th and 5th years can be associate members of the AIA. So I hear where you're going from a representation standpoint, but there's not a large student body population that is members of AIA.
AIAS.
So she was the AIAS liaison to the national board.
Right.
Yes.
Which she was elected to by her group of peers. When I went to school, I stood away from AIAS folks because they were on a different level. Like I was just trying to survive and they were doing all these extra things. And I was like, nah, I can't be down with that. So I stood away from that. But that in itself should be another podcast because I hear what you're saying, but I'm still confused.
That's why I was hoping to add some clarity in there. But yeah.
Basically, there's multiple layers of bureaucracy going on here.
Already. And
Already.
It's been 2 minutes.
Yeah. So just there's a AIA represents the professionals and AIAS represents the students, and they're separate organizations and both have their own politics. And my pathway into AIA was through AIAS, which is the student group. And so because I was elected by other student leaders, I got to serve on the national AIA board as the student representative.
Okay. All right. How about you, Evelyn? Was it the same?
No.
Convoluted path?
No. So I was engaged in AIAS and I had a wonderful AIAS chapter, but I never really took on any leadership roles there. I think I did on a whim try to start a student store that was maybe successful for 2 years at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri. But no, so I knew what I needed to do to get licensed, right, when I got into the profession. And I graduated from SciArc and I got a job and I immediately started my IDP, registered with NCARB. And I was looking for a mentor outside of work because they recommend that your mentor for IDP be different from your supervisor. So I went to the AIA chapter, just knowing of the AIA because we had a great AIAS chapter, and said, hey, can you help me find a mentor? And they did that. And then they're like, hey, did you want to get involved with anything? And at first I said no, but then they kept asking me. They're like, hey, do you want to help design the design awards venue? And I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. And that was my first committee, was the AIA Orange County Design Awards Committee.
Did you lead the committee?
No, but they needed literally help with, it was event layout. So it was like, where does they had the event planned already. It was in the Noguchi Gardens in Orange County. And they're like, we need help laying out where the stage and the chairs go so we can show the vendors where to put things. So that was like the very first thing I did.
But interestingly enough, we both kind of found our way in because we were looking for mentorship.
Yes.
Do you still talk to your mentors from way back when?
From way back when. I do. I would say, and we can talk about this, but I think everyone's experience, I think, is a little bit different in their local components. It's really dependent upon the individual leadership there and the executive director there. Cheryl Steele was the executive director at the time, but they were all very encouraging. So there's definitely been mentors that I've met both in Orange County and throughout my career in California, especially, that I've kept in touch with over time for a very long time.
And yes, I still keep up with mine, though. I think I was formally matched with someone, and that's not really who I bonded with. I actually, as the student leader, I kind of bonded with the woman who was organizing the professionals, and we weren't matched, but we became, like a mentorship partnership just by default for our interest in leadership. And she's been someone that I've continued to stay in touch with throughout my whole career. Her name's Georgia Cameron, and she works at Little, and she always understood my passion for leadership. And so she was always trying to help me figure out how to connect the dots. And yeah, we're still friends.
So throughout your AIA life, how many committees have you been on? And can you name them?
Man, I don't know
That's
if I
gonna
could.
take a good. That's you don't want to listen to all of that.
Could I name them all?
Or, at least the ones that come into mind. Okay, so for me, my story, okay, is I have a bittersweet relationship always and forever with architecture. And so I got laid off in '08 during that time. And I was fortunate enough to get hired doing government stuff. And so I decided that I need some architect friends. I got into the AIA DC Emerging Architects Committee, and we did some programs and so forth. I can't remember how this happened, but I made some cold calls and I ended up talking to this woman named Lauren Bosick. And she
That's
was
a familiar name.
Mhm.
she was Miss AIA too. And through her, I end up on the AIA Diversity and Inclusion Council. So that's my lead into national. And then I was on the AIA Nova Women in Architecture group. And I think I pretty kept it low key. I think those three are the major ones that is coming to my mind. So,
Well, like you, I was kind of in the middle of the recession at a really not ideal time in my career. So I struggled a lot, actually. And the AIA was a safe place for me in terms of stability, which, I don't think a lot of people have that experience, but I just wasn't, I wasn't having a lot of success in my career. And I leaned into volunteering as a way to find stability because I needed people in my corner who were going to be supportive, and that's where I could find it. So after I got off the AIA board, the committee that I ended up with the longest was called the AIA Center for Civic Leadership, which was a hodgepodge of self-identified leaders who wanted to be on that committee, not because they were appointed, but because they had a passion for leadership and civic engagement. And they wanted to see the AIA do something with leadership because at that point in time, they weren't. And so we were kind of like, I don't know, I would say we were a little bit of a rebellious group who just wanted to exist. And so we did. And we created a community of architects who were advocating for leadership education and civic engagement and ways to advance both of those agendas within the national organization. And so I did that for almost 10 years.
That's a long time to be on a committee.
Yeah, eventually I had to kind of phase it out, but I think the reason it extended so long was because it wasn't formally something you could be appointed to, so you could just stay on it. And also we created the Leadership Institute, or we made sure that the Leadership Institute launched and existed over a couple of years. So I think in trying to make sure that program happened, I stuck around for a while just to it was an event that happened multiple times over several years.
So I just pulled up my fellows application because it's the easiest way to look at this to try to answer your question. And I have participated in over 30 committees at the local, state, and national level. So we are not going to list all of them. And
why?
Why? I think the AIA has really became a second family. I like participating in groups. I've never really thought about this, but for my entire life, I played soccer. And starting in 4th grade, it was on the competitive level. So I had this like insular team that I followed that like I grew up with. And it was a small enough community that I started playing club soccer in 4th grade, and we all played together on club all the way through high school together. And then I had that same type of club in college because I played a couple of years. And I think a part of me was just like looking for another club to be a part of, honestly. I was in architecture school, and the hours that they keep, and and out of architecture I was trying to get my license. So I found myself in a really supportive community that was going to help me get my license, that understood what I was going through. And I think if I look at the majority of my friends in my professional career, they either come from two places. They come from soccer teams, which I continued to play on until I became pregnant with my first kid, or they come from the AIA. So
yeah, similarly, I've been involved for a long time, and it's because I feel like it's a like-minded group of people that understand me, that I just couldn't get that in certain career moments that I had. I just felt like I fit better with people in the AIA than I did with people that I worked with professionally. Sometimes they just seemed to understand me, and they liked the things that I could contribute, the leadership skills I had, being outspoken, being someone who really wanted to advocate for things and care about things and collaborate and advance work in that way. So I guess I stayed involved because it is my community. These are my people, I like people who are leaders and want to contribute to something greater than themselves.
Like family, there's confusion and drama. Let's get into the structure of AIA. And we did a little bit with the AIAS. AIA National versus AIA State and Local. Did you know the difference? Did you always know? You didn't know, and then you found out? Like, what was the story? Or I could start. Like, I didn't. Well, I'm different because DC is not a state. So it's its own entity. So we just paid DC dues, and then we just paid national dues. And then I moved to Maryland, and then there's a state, and then there's a chapter, like a local, and then national. And one person described it as like literally like the federal government is national and the state is state, and then local is like county, I guess. That's the best way that someone has described it to me.
But when you were in DC, they were a part of the Mid-Atlantic region, weren't they?
In terms of money, right? There's 3 pools, right? And DC has 2 pools. So there's no.
But DC was part of a region. You didn't pay money.
Yeah. No, there's no Mid-Atlantic. There is a Mid-Atlantic region. So there's Mid-Atlantic, and then there's the Virginias. I don't know why Virginia is different, but there's no Mid-Atlantic dues.
Yeah, the regions are different than she's talking about dues structure, which you know all too well.
Yes. So I'm going to default to Je'Nen on this one, because I think she got thrown into AIA National, and people usually find their way to AIA National. So you probably I think all the structure.
I think, okay, I'm trying to decide where to start the story. I came from North Carolina, and there was a really strong component in Charlotte. And then, of course, we had a really strong state component. And North Carolina was part of the South Atlantic region at that time. Regions are going away, but basically there is a complex system where your component fits into a region. But I made the jump from being local to on the national board. And I think a very compelling part of that narrative is understanding that at that time, when the board was 50 plus people, the board represented all of those different regions. And so everybody who was an elected leader that came up from any of those smaller components that could be a local city like Charlotte had an opportunity to be represented on the national board by somebody who was elected from their region. So there is a lot of complicated hierarchy, I guess, in terms of how do you get from your local engagement to the national one. Obviously, you can't have one person per each location. So the way they do that is to consolidate into these buckets. And I think that that's kind of why things start narrowing down as you get to the top of that hierarchy. So, but it still resulted in a 50-person board, which was a lot of voices in the room. But what was very interesting to me is just getting to speak to so many different leaders that had come from different regions around the country and understand that all of the issues that leaders are facing in their local arena are similar to the same conversations that are happening in other parts of the country. They're a little bit nuanced and different, but they generally carry very common themes. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but that, I think, helps me kind of understand some of the complexity is just that you're trying to narrow it down to get to a board governance structure at the top that represents all of the 90,000 members. So how do you create that kind of hierarchy that can narrow it?
And it was 18 regions, and then they formed the international region shortly before you came onto the board. So there was 19 regions until last year.
Right. And last year, it all changed.
But I'll start with how I found out about all the local levels. So I joined Orange County, and then at one point there was this election for California, and I didn't know there was an AIA California that was different from Orange County. And had I been smart and actually looked at my dues, I might have asked that question and asked why I'm paying into not only Orange County, but California, and then this national entity. But the current associate director for Southern California, serving on the California board, her position was up for election. And she reached out to Cheryl Steele and said, hey, are any associates active in Orange County that would be good for this role? And Cheryl said, me. So I went and ran and spoke in front of 50, because the California board is actually larger than the national board, 50 California architects, and said, you should choose me to be your associate director, and why? I also think I ran unopposed, frankly, because we actually have a lot of problems getting younger people to run for these roles. One, because they don't always know they exist, and two, it's actually a fairly decent time commitment to be on the California board. And then as soon as you do get on the California board, though, they have this amazing support structure for emerging professionals. And I ran, my next role was the regional associate director. And as a regional associate director, you get to serve on the National Associates Committee. And that was kind of my first interaction with national. And then I eventually wanted to become chair of the National Associates Committee. And then most of the work that I did, I came back to California for a little bit, but most of the work from that point on was at the national level.
So how is it now? So there's still 50 persons on the board, correct? No. There's still a board.
There's still a board. So one of the really big changes that happened in the last...
It happened in 2016. 2016,
the organization voted to create the Strategic Council, which put in place a board and this entity called the Strategic Council. And this is an entirely new governance structure model that's emerged in the last 5 years that I know nothing about and is very strange to me. But Evelyn, I think you have more experience with this than I do.
So I was elected to California to serve on the national board when there were regions. And it's a 3-year term, and I served 1 year on the national board, the same 50-person board Je'Nen was referring to before the bylaws changed. So in 2017, I served on the first Strategic Council. And then there's a smaller board. So the current board is made out of the president, the vice president, secretary, treasurer, 6 at-large representatives, each on a 3-year term. 3 of those representatives are elected by the general membership, kind of, sort of, at the annual business meeting. And 3 of those representatives are elected by the Strategic Council to serve on the board. And then the president has the option to appoint a couple public directors or just directors in general that serve 1-year terms in addition to those other individuals.
Was that kind of sort of that you were referring to? That 3 are elected and the others are appointed?
Well, 3 are elected from the Strategic Council, and then 3 are elected from the annual business meeting. And the reason why I said kind of sort of is because it's hard to understand how to vote at the annual business meeting. And if you look at the actual number of delegates representing the 90,000 members, only about 5% of the membership is voting for AIA national leadership, which is why I said kind of, sort of. I don't know if this episode is bringing anyone any more clarity or just confusing.
No,
everyone. So
you're
much more.
absolutely right in that statement that people who are listening, they either grab a pen and pencil and try to draw a chart, which I would not advise, or they're just totally confused. And it's a representation of AIA in itself. Shit's confusing. All you know is there's a president and vice president and a secretary and all that stuff. And you hear rumors of a strategic council, but that is all you can fathom. And then you mentioned NAC, the National Associate. No, wait, you didn't mention that. You mentioned that, but you were also on why Young Architects. Or which one? Both of you were on, or no? Nobody was.
I served as chair of the National Associates Committee, and then I also later served as chair of the Young Architects Forum.
Okay. All right. Wasn't making that up.
One thing I want to make a point of just about the confusion before we move on to the next complicated topic is that I think a really helpful thing to understand about AIA politics is that it's run by architects, and every couple of years, a new architect is elected president, and architects love to design things. And so I think the AIA is a perfect example of something that's been redesigned and redesigned and redesigned and redesigned and redesigned. And it is complicated as a result. There's always something moving and changing. And unless you've been involved, you don't really understand. And then if you step off that bus for a little bit, you might lose the context of the conversation. For me, I've been out of the game. So strategic council to me feels like a really strange concept in my mind, whereas anybody who's been involved for the past 5 years that understands or has served on strategic council gets it. So I think it's just a moving target, and it's organic because it's led by people, and people hold the knowledge about how it functions.
Do you think that we did this on purpose?
No, I don't think so. I think it's been like the habit of architects to redesign in pursuit of perfecting it, and then too many iterations might have caused some confusion in some areas. But I don't think it's been malicious. I don't think it's been done with the intention of making it worse. I think it was done with the hope of making it better.
So this 3-structure model isn't unique to the AIA too, right? All of these types of governance models were based on some other governance model from another association or membership organization. So I think it's good intentioned. I think the turnover in leadership is even well-intentioned, right? You want more and different and new thought leadership to be able to come through that pipeline. I just think it makes it hard for consistency's sake over the long term, especially when you get to national. You have to be extra patient about what it means to create true change there. That governance structure change from the board to the strategic council, and even the most recent run from regions to states, before it hit the annual business meeting, it was in conversations for 3 to 5 years prior to that to get to the floor of the annual business meeting.
Yeah. And you can kind of see the ripple effect of that.
Did you say 3 to 5 years to get something?
To get a big governance change, the governance change from board to strategic council and board, from the big board to the smaller board and the strategic council, took a long time to build a consensus and making sure everyone's okay. Because the idea is when you get to the annual meeting, yes, there's debate that is allowed to happen, but you don't elevate things to a bylaws change, because it takes 2/3 of the membership's vote until you're really sure ready is like actually going to to happen. Things don't land on a bylaws change ballot arbitrarily, I would say.
And I can promise you that at that meeting, when they voted on this, there's like always 2 microphones when it's in person. And both microphones were packed with people who had plenty to say about it. So it was not like a vote that was like, oh yeah, no big deal. No, it was like a very big deal vote, like to change the governance structure. And I just want to mention that one of the design elements that they were trying to resolve by making this change was to make the board smaller, to drop it down from 50 to a much smaller board that would allow the board to be more nimble.
Do you think they were successful?
I think it depends on who you talk to, really. And I think we have to be patient. Just like we have to be patient in the ability to create the change, I think we have to be patient in the outcomes from the results. Because I think Peter, who was just the former president last year, Peter Exley, he is still a legacy board member because it took him that long to work through the positions to run, because typically people go through these positions before they run for president. So yes, a lot of change has happened over the course that Peter was a director for Illinois before he ran for the board. But I feel like you need to almost get rid of all of these legacy people to kind of really see how the change is affected in the end. And it takes a while to get through those individuals.
What do you mean by legacy?
Not legacy. I almost don't want to say that because I consider myself a legacy, but it's the idea that people that were aware of the old governance structure, like it takes a while for leadership to turn over in like 100%, I guess is what I'm saying.
There's also pathways to getting elected into these various levels of leadership. And some people...
And you can jump the pathway.
Yeah, you can certainly jump the pathway. The way some components are still running, you serve as a sequence, like let's say secretary, then treasurer, then you can run for president-elect, then you can run for president, and then you can and that's at your local component. And then once you do that, then you can run for a state position, or then you can run for a council or whatever. But there are a lot of pathways in place from all locations across the AIA that are creating this leadership pipeline towards the top. And so some people who are even in that pipeline are still working their way forward.
I want to get into elections and how it's run. So this was my second election. I was a delegate. The first time I was I think the conference was in Chicago. Not this one, obviously, but the last.
That was almost 10 years ago.
Yes. I've been paying AIA for a long time. My first time, I had to wake up at a crack of dawn and listen to speeches. And then you meet with your chapter, and then you talk, and then you go on the expo floor and they give you like a note or whatever. And then you go in this little room and then you do something, and then you come out, and the next day they make this huge announcement, and they were like, oh my goodness, yay. So
can I just say, you don't sound very excited about that, but I really, 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 really miss that a lot. Like, that is my very fond experience of AIA elections.
This is getting up early. Like I was out till 4:30 in the morning, and you tell me I have to turn around.
It's also, I mean, historically, it's also been Saturday, right? So it's the last day of the conference, and conference is always a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, I feel you. I always remember, like, I always find myself racing to get to the annual business meeting with like some breakfast that I managed to scrounge up at whatever is open that early in the morning, like either like a McDonald's or something, because none of the food service places in the conference
or that hotel
center
banana that you grabbed on your way out.
Yeah. Like I'm always like scrounging around for breakfast the morning of the annual meeting, the last day of conference. So yeah.
I remember, and they still do it, my local chapter will send out an email saying, if you're interested in becoming a delegate, hit us up. And I thought like, oh, delegate. Okay, what does that mean? I had no clue. All of a sudden you see this person won the election and you're like, I don't remember voting. Where's my ballot? You don't get a ballot. That's where the delegates come in. It's how this country works, kind of, sort of. People vote in an election. There's the whole Biden versus Trump. You really understand Congress have to vote who gets to become president. So it's similar in AIA. You ladies could correct me if I'm incorrect in that. So this time around, it was virtual, confusing as F. Because like I literally had like my phone, and everybody's at work. It's in the middle of the day. I literally had my phone and I'm waiting for an email to let me know when I could enter this type of software and then log into Zoom. And they didn't tell you it was a 2-day process. And it's not like day 1 and day 2. No, day 1 started Monday, day 2 started Friday. I can't remember how it went, but it wasn't 2 consecutive days. And then there's another meeting, because you still have to meet with your local chapter to discuss. And then you go and vote. The thing that threw me off too is the discussion part. The 2 times I did this, I was in 2 completely different chapters. One chapter was like, we're going to all vote for this person. And my other chapter was like, do what you will. We're not going to tell you. The first one disturbed me because I don't know any of these people. I'm not on a board or anything. I'm just a regular member. And you're telling me that I have to agree to vote on this one person. I'm like, that takes away from my freedom.
Yeah. What you're talking about is block voting. And block voting, so every component gets to decide how they vote. And some components opt to block vote, and that means that the entire group votes for the same candidates across the board with all of their votes. So for example, like if a component has a set number of members, they get a set number of votes, and they would vote all of those votes behind specific candidates. That's block voting. California, and there's different components in the state that do it differently, but I know for sure San Francisco is one of the ones that does not block vote, and they have a ton of members, but each voting delegate has the opportunity to vote how they want individually. So you still have to be appointed to become a delegate to represent those votes and vote on behalf of the chapter, but they're not going to tell you how to vote. They can make recommendations, but at the end of the day, you show up and you vote how you want to. So those are 2 different things that you see in voting with AIA. And it's all based on your individual component and how they have historically done things or how they want to do things as a leadership group.
Do they know who you voted for? Your components know?
San Francisco, no. So, no.
In general, no.
No, but they do its best to kind of educate. I feel like the components who don't block vote, not to say that components that do block vote, like actually, I know for a fact that there are several components that do block vote, but they have like very deep discussions with their membership before they decide who gets to carry where that vote's going to land. But similarly, those components that do not block vote, I think also, I would say almost make an extra effort to educate their delegates, because like San Francisco sent like 25 delegates to carry all of San Francisco's vote. So you want them to be educated delegates versus if you block vote, I mean, technically you would hope that that one person is educated, but yes.
How is the number of delegates based? Do you ladies know?
So there's delegates and then there's voter apportionment, and they're 2 different things. So every component is given kind of a number of votes based on how many members a component has. And then it's up to the individual component to decide how they want to break up those number of votes. So some components send the vice president and president. So that means that they've essentially said all of our votes are going to be carried by those two people. Some do a single block vote. Some people some components like San Francisco said, anyone who wants to be a delegate, raise your hand. And that's however many people opt in, that's how the votes are, our votes are going to get split. So, I mean, some people could say, great, you're giving more people a vote in your component. I would say those that are in support of block voting would say that San Francisco actually, even though they're one of the larger components, they dilute their vote because they dilute their power as an individual component because we don't know who the delegates ultimately vote for.
How do you feel about the way they vote? I don't like it. What's wrong with the popular vote?
I don't know if AIA ever had a popular vote.
Never had a popular vote.
Because I don't
to
think,
my knowledge,
I don't think most, if you look at associations, I don't think most associations would vote with a popular vote because when you're talking about the number of members that AIA has, like 90,000, I don't know that any association of that scale would vote with a popular vote that I'm aware of. I could be wrong.
I will say that there's a current committee that I happen to be on called the Members' Voice Task Force that is floating the idea of one member, one vote. But then I think we have, in a good way or a bad way, depending on how you want to look at it, the same issues that we have with voting, even as a general population in the US, right? So if it's one member, one vote, then how do we educate all of those members? And how do we get them to show up to it?
Yeah.
And then there's the components, the people that will stand in the way of that will probably most likely be the components who block vote, who believe they hold their power by being able to control the vote.
I will say, Melissa, that I totally I've been in enough elections at this point to see outcomes go in all directions because of exactly the voting that you're describing. Like I've seen years when there's candidates that you think are the strong one that you think is going to win, and then someone pops in the race, and then it's like and I'm talking really specifically about a couple of years ago. There was like a race that I was like, I think it's going to go this way. And there was block voting happening that derailed the race, like in the way that I thought it was going to go. And I thought that this person was going to win, and they didn't. And it really, really, really surprised me. And so I struggle with it because I do think there's some politicking that happens that I've seen go down in prior years with block voting. And so I struggle with that concept just because I've seen that completely change the trajectory of the AIA at the national level.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm like not talking about specifics because I don't want to get in the weeds on it, but like it is something that has rubbed me the wrong way before.
Why do you two stay in AIA? I think you hinted it earlier because of people. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I mean, I think, that was a real personal reason in terms of like friendship circle. I stay involved because it is the world's largest organization for architects. And, we've been talking about all the struggles of the politics of the AIA, but especially at the national level, the AIA does a lot for advocacy on behalf of the architecture profession at large. You could even say that they do a lot for advocacy for both our members and our non-members. A recent example is making sure that architects get their fair share when it came to the pandemic and making sure we were on the list for all the PPP loans as a business that is in line for those type of loans. So people were able to claim that and pay their employees through the pandemic. That was a very small example of the advocacy. But I stay involved because I've stepped away from the profession to know and believe that as an organization, as a profession, as an industry, if we keep doing the things that we've done and keep just trudging along, I'm really worried about where the profession is going to be in the future. And I believe that the AIA is one area that can help create that change, or provide at least a platform to talk about the change that needs to happen in order for the profession to remain relevant. And ultimately, I just love the people. I have talked about this on episodes at Practice Disrupted, where I stepped away intentionally for a year because I was burnt out with the AIA when I went to business school. And I ultimately ended up stepping right back into it because I missed the people that really want, like, it's architects are good people, right? The good architects want to make a difference in their communities. They want to leave their communities better off than they found them. And those are the people that I want in my life.
Yeah, I think for me, similarly, I find that this is the community that I see people who want to change the industry showing up in. Like, there's so many different interest groups within the AIA. Like, if you kind of get in the weeds, you start to see different groups rallying behind different things. But if you really listen, they're all advocating for change. The change that they want to see might be different, but they really believe in the power of the AIA to amplify the change that they're hoping for, either in society or in the profession or in their firm, even with NCARB or NAAB. Like, they see it as a vehicle to have that meaningful dialogue and make transformation happen. And so whether you believe that the AIA is capable of change or not, it is the largest body that is governing architects. And so it has the potential. And I just constantly see people who are complaining and then not getting involved in the AIA. And it's like, well, if you're not involved, like, how do you expect anything to move? How do you expect anything to shift? Standing off to the sidelines and complaining is not the way that change is going to be fostered. If you want to bring about that transformation that I think so many architects are craving, you have to engage the entity that's capable of propelling that type of momentum forward.
I don't think we convinced her.
No. I mean, I'm still a member. I'm in addition to all the things I list previously, I'm a vice chair of the Housing and Community Development Knowledge Community, which we didn't even talk about that part. Committees and knowledge committees and all that stuff. But that's for next time. We really didn't get into the juice of politics because I wanted to do the basics. So this is a basic understanding of how confusing AI is. If anything else, audience, is you got out of this whole conversation more confused about AIA and the reason why the 2 out of the 3 people on this call love it.
I didn't know we were trying to convince you. I'm gonna have to go think about my argument.
Well, I haven't left yet, and I've been here for 10, 15 years. So,
well, then why do you stay?
I stay because the committees that I'm on, like, I love my knowledge committee and my housing committee. Like, I love them, and we do good things. We do really good things on that committee. I am not active on my local anything, and I love right now I'm at Potomac Valley, and I love the people at Potomac Valley. And I purposely did not do anything with Potomac Valley because I didn't want burnout. And I'm good with that one national committee. And that's it. And then I have this podcast. And at one point in life, I was like Evelyn, and I was just loaded up with AIA stuff. And then I switched to NOMA, and I was like, and then I was balancing AIA and NOMA. It was crazy early 2000s, guys. Crazy early 2000s. But yeah, I don't know. My boss is paying for AIA. So,
I mean, that's why a lot of people have AIA after their name.
Yeah. But for a while though, I was paying. But I'm an associate. I'm not licensed. So I'm not paying a card note or a house note for some people of membership dues. Next time we get together for part two of AIA and really get into the meat of it. But I'm sorry, but what was your question, Evelyn?
No, I was just saying that, that your story is not an unusual one. And I think we're constantly looking for ways to kind of talk about how to increase the value of membership and the value of input into the organization and what people get out of it.
I think the solution is simple, but as designers, we complicate things. I think that when you mentioned the PPP loan during the pandemic, nobody knew that. It's the best kept secret. And that's the problem with AIA. They have a lot of best kept secrets. And when they think they're sending something out, they're sending a press release or put something on the website that no one else can find. It's really bad. And the stuff that they do market, that they throw in your face, is really superficial. We have a bad image problem, and it's our fault, really. But there's a whole bunch of other things I want to talk to you guys about. I want to be aware of you guys' time, and I am totally grateful. I really enjoyed this conversation. It went by super quick. So thank you again, ladies, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having
us. If you actually ever do want a part 2.
Yes, definitely.
After this, I think we're happy to. It's
I feel like I don't know. I could keep going. I feel like we just warmed up. I'm like,
yeah,
okay,
that's
I'm
a
ready.
sad thing. People don't want to know what Je'Nen and I talk about in our off time. I think maybe we stay in the AIA because like everyone else would just be bored of our conversations. If it weren't for our like fellow AIA friends.
No. I'm pretty sure your personal lives is just as exciting. I know, Evelyn, your kids are doing something crazy. Je'Nen, I know your dog is doing something crazy.
Yeah. No, so I've pulled back from AIA, so I'm kind of on the recovery side of AIA these days, but I still am down for a chat every once in a while.
Again, we have plenty of stories, but next time, hopefully later on before the year's over. Okay. All right, ladies. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. Looking forward to next time.
Hey, listeners. I have an exciting announcement. I decided to launch a membership program for the show, where you have a chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating the show, and it means the world to me that you all tune in to keep hearing me week after week. But it takes an immense amount of time and energy to produce. I want to keep the show going, and I want to invest in its growth. And I also want you to become a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you a chance to officially become a supporter of the show at glow.fm/archispolly, ARCHISPOLLY, or by clicking the link in the show notes. It's quick and easy. It takes less than 30 seconds and just takes clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. If this show is part of your day or week, and you like what I'm doing, then visit glow.fm/archispolly, all one word, and support me and the show in any way you can today.